house rules for you on the screen. I don't think I'm going to repeat that. All of us can read. So I want to get right to it and introduce Prof. Wim, who's going to share with us his knowledge today. Now, many of you know Prof. Wim, and I know that he is a well-known professor of social work in South Africa, specifically where he's working and been working for many years now. He's an NRF-rated researcher and a well-known author and researcher of both quantitative and qualitative designs. Now, I went and looked, what do you call a person who is so eager to share his knowledge or her knowledge? And a lot of words came up to describe a person who shares their knowledge so voluntary and graciously with us. And interesting words came up. We all know a person who teaches and shares knowledge is a teacher or instructor. Some websites will refer to a boffin, someone who's a boffin. And we would also often say that someone is a boffin on something. But a word that I really like is a maven, M-A-V-E-N. And a maven refers to someone who is keen to teach others what he knows. But it goes further. It says that it's a person who has a strong understanding of a topic or subject, and as a result can teach others. And often we would refer to that person or ask that person for assistance. And then the final one, and this is how I want to introduce you today, Prof. Wim, is a person who shares their knowledge is also referred to as a mine of information. And it's someone who you can trust to get a lot of information out. And it works well with sharing knowledge because you're always able to ask them more questions to help your own understanding. Prof. Wim, you are a mine of information, and I'm also always so fascinated to listen to what you know, and then specifically about research. And I thank you so much for your willingness again to share your knowledge and understanding and make a very interesting, but sometimes for us a difficult topic available and open it up to us and open a door to us to better understand it. Thank you so much, colleagues, and I'm going to now hand over to Prof. Wim. Thank you, Prof. Wim.
Thank you, Prof. Ansi. It's very nice and to be here this morning, and thanks for the good words. You certainly have made it possible for me to now do my best in this one. But I must say I'm very fascinated by the whole prospect of Delphi panels, and therefore I look forward to this presentation. So colleagues, a warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here. I trust that this will be also an interactive session. I see that at the moment I'm not able to see my second screen, so Prof. Ansi, will you from time to time interject with the chats and just see what's going on there and what are the questions?
Yeah. I will, Prof. Wim, just before you start, can you record from your side? I know you have your backup plan.
Yes, I have my backup plan. I am recording it. So,
in terms of Teams, Jessica, can
see.
You try? Oh, I can, Jessica, if you scroll down to more, then you can choose start recording on your site. I can also do that if it's fine. Okay, wonderful, thank you.
Okay, great stuff. So yeah, colleagues, so let's start. I would welcome it if you want to ask questions or make statements in between. Feel free to do so. It's really intended to be interactive. Okay, so let's get started on this fascinating topic. The order of the day will be that for the first hour we will talk about the philosophy of Delphi panels and how to do it, how to incorporate it into research. And then we will move on to a few more technical aspects related to how to analyze the data, how to get consensus, and so forth. So let's look at what is the Delphi technique. I was tempted to ask you, but what do you want to know about this Delphi technique? Because it is actually such a very easy method to utilize, and it is so dynamic. So common definitions about the Delphi technique is that it is an talk estimate method. So what that means is you talk to people and you make an estimation, or you of what they have said, and you incorporate that into another talk, and then you estimate again, and then you talk again. So it is like a building process of starting somewhere, developing something, and then progressively refining that product until everybody is happy with it. So in another definition, it said that the Delphi technique collects opinions from experts who are knowledgeable about a topic, and I think that that is the key to an effective Delphi technique, is that you need to have a panel that is knowledgeable about a topic, and that panel should be selected purposefully for their knowledge. So a lot of your effort goes into making sure this panel is knowledgeable, and they will be able to help you in refining the product. There are models where they call it like random models, where you use like a pool of panelists or experts, and you each time in each round of the Delphi method you utilize a different group, but that's less common for the simple reason that you want to have a consistent panel that walks the walk with you in refining this product. So you capitalize in the Delphi technique on the group effort, yet this is without the effects of group dynamics. And group dynamics is pretty much part of focus groups. You think of focus groups, and there is that whole phenomenon of group think. Sometimes you don't want that group think. You don't want all people in a group to start thinking along the same lines. You want to preserve that unique contribution, and that is what the Delphi panel will offer you, is that freedom from the group dynamics. And I'll explain how that works in later on in the session. So the whole Delphi concept works on a consensus approach regarding the nature of the end product. So consensus means that people have to gradually move together. It's almost like a content validation exercise. So the people are maybe far apart in the beginning, but as you proceed through the Delphi technique, they tend to get closer together in opinion, and later on they have actually got consensus. So consensus is not an instant occurrence. It takes a while to do it. So the whole idea of the Delphi panel was actually developed in the 1950s and 60s. Around about that time it became popular. And it was initially developed in the economic sector. So they used it for developing economic scenarios and future plans, and like forecasting models. So they used experts to refine these economic theories and apply them to the future. So what is the aim then? The aim is to use a panel of experts for the refinement of a document. It could be a policy, a set of procedures, or a scale items, a list of items that are important to the researcher, a protocol. You will see just now when we look at examples of applications, there are actually just an unending number of possible uses for the Delphi panel. it is not necessarily always used within a research context. I discovered several articles that do report on Delphi, on Delphi technique and how it is used in refining a document. So, and that was part of a formal research project. I know that at the Northwest University, we increasingly start using this technique as an alternative method, a research method. But there are the uses and the variety of applications are just unending, and there's actually not a firm rule as to exactly how must you structure a Delphi panel. The one thing that is an uncertainty in the literature, for instance, is whether you only use qualitative methodology or only quantitative. You can use both of them interchangeably in the same project, as long as you refine your and reach your target. So the aim is constantly, whilst you are conducting the Delphi panel, it's to evaluate the extent of consensus reached. So you would expect that maybe initially the level of consensus should be low, and as you proceed, it actually continuously gets better until a point where you are satisfied, that everybody's on the same page. So it makes use of the converging consensus approach. So I give my input, it gets implemented in the document, then I see the other people's comments, that's quite an essential part of the whole panel. And then that shapes my view to some extent and prompts me to make more input. So that in a very simple way is kind of what is happening in a Delphi panel. It's like a revolving, ongoing process until you have a common document that everybody agrees to. Yet, and that's the interesting thing, is that the people are aware of that there are other panelists, but they don't know them. So that is quite helpful, and that reduces the chances of groupthink and so forth. Just imagine that we sit in a Delphi panel and we know that we have the Minister of Social Development as one of our panelists, So that would put a whole different angle on the process. So it's best not to make that known. You just know there are other panelists, but you, as a fellow panelist, you don't know who are those people. And that's part of the secret. So here are a couple of applications of the Delphi technique. So mapping content domains in an assessment tool, that's something that I thought about within social work. Refining a policy or a procedures document, that's also commonly used. You circulate this document and you get feedback. Getting consensus about a form of treatment, what would be the best practice? How would you best treat a certain condition? Consensus on a complex course of action. So what would be the course of action to take in resolving, let's say, chronic drug abuse, or whatever the topic may be. So it's a complex solution that has to be found. It's almost like a strategy or a strategic planning that has to take place. Formalizing a range of steps in an intervention. So start here, do that, then go on to do this, then you get feedback, that protocol idea of how to proceed with an intervention, where to start and where to end. Reaching consensus on an operating procedure. So this could be more within an organizational context. Predicting outcomes of a situation. That's the typical what if. What if this happens? What if that happens? For example, a very topical panel could be held on what if the price of petrol increases to 30 Rand. What will be the implication of that? Then to estimate the impact of a situation. What will happen if the war in the Ukraine is not ended within the next year? So it's forecasting, thinking into the future. The likelihood of a scenario playing out, and unfortunately, I think in the social sciences and specifically in social work, we don't do these kinds of things. We don't think about the future. We are so involved with the present and with people's needs as they are, that we sometimes don't think about the future. But a question could be, what if the child support grant does not help? Or will it create dependency if we continue giving out this grant? So these are like some of the questions that could be more applicable to the social work context. And then participatory policy making processes. So literally there are so many different applications, and as I said, not all of them are within a research context, although it makes a very good and useful research project. So to give you an example of one such project is one of our master students did a study recently where we were looking at in the child protection field how to assess prospective foster parents. And we approached a number of organizations in the Northwest, and we asked them to make available their protocols, their plans, their assessment schedules. How do they determine how parents are suitable to act as foster parents? So then we got a number of those frameworks from these organizations, and then we organized a day where all these organizations brought representatives, and we invited practitioners from the field, and we gave them a presentation on what should such a framework for assessing foster parents, what should it look like, what should be in it. So we gave them like general criteria, and after that all the participants in that meeting got a rating scale, and they had to rate the frameworks. There were like different stalls or booths, and a representative of that organization and that framework was there, and they made a brief presentation to all the panelists in the audience, and they then had to do a rating and just hand it in as their contribution. And it was amazing what we got from that single round Delphi panel regarding what should be the ideal framework for assessing foster parents. So obviously you can now take it further in another type of project where you can once again do the Delphi panel. In this instance, the panelists were present in the meeting, but normally they are not. They are sitting at home, and you communicate with them via email or via a different electronic media. So what are the advantages of the Delphi method? You gain a multitude of opinions, and people have their own opinions, and they feel free to offer that in privacy. They might be less likely to offer it in a focus group, but from the confines of their own computer, they are often more free. Is there a question? I just want to know. Okay, so it adds richness to the design input, in designing material, designing documents, policies, and so on. It adds a lot of richness. You can also eliminate unwanted content, So the principle of centralizing effort through consensus is what drives the whole. It's a major advantage of this technique. And then obviously the whole idea of quality improvement. You just get so much better product in the end by involving other people. So the one advantage that none of the other methods has is that confidentiality is ensured for the participants. Their participation is anonymous, and therefore, they feel a lot more free to participate. So it is also very useful to use this in an online context. So I'm just going to hang in here. Are there any questions or comments at the moment?
I haven't seen anything, but colleagues, are there any questions, any comments so far?
Good morning, colleagues.
Yes, good morning.
Yeah, I do have a question. Maybe if it's possible, if you can go back to the slide where you mentioned that Delphi is a consensus approach. You can move back.
Okay.
To the next slide.
Over here. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Over here. This one.
Is it this one?
Is it this one?
No, it's not this one.
Previous one?
Because you gave an example of a focus group discussion where you sometimes find that the participants tend to respond in a similar way.
Okay.
And
yeah,
and then I just thought I'm getting a bit lost with regard to the consensus approach and that. How do you break that line between the two? Because they seem to be a bit. It might be very difficult. I imagine you need a very good skill to make sure that you still achieve the consensus approach without the participants influencing one another.
Yeah. Okay, I'm with you. Well, let's just go for a moment to the focus group discussion. So, in a focus group discussion, the nature of the conversation can be the same as in a Delphi, because you are asking opinions from people regarding, producing ideas. So that's what the two techniques have in common, is that they draw on people's contribution, their ideas, to enrich a certain concept or document, to get ideas from them. But in the focus group setting, you find it's like a sociological phenomenon. If it's group dynamics. If you think that the differences between individual performance and group performance is more effective. It gives a better and a richer end product, whereas individual performance does not have that quality but is faster. So the group process takes longer and is slower. It takes longer, but the quality is better, versus the individual input that is fast, it's quick, because I just sit down, I write up my own ideas, and there it is. There's the end product. But it does not have the same quality. So in a focus group setting, where people are together, you get this phenomenon that's called groupthink, which means I sit and I hear what someone else is saying, and that changes my perspective on the spot. And because I know this person is an authority in A, B, or C, I tend to respect his or her views. So gradually I start reshaping my idea to fit in with the bigger group and with the group leaders or the perceived leaders in the group. So that's not necessarily bad, It's one of those things. It's 50 of the one and half of the other. 50% or half. It's the same kind of thing. So in a Delphi panel, the panelists do not meet physically, especially not whilst they are doing their work. There may be feedback sessions or feedback documents, summary documents that the researcher or the facilitator of the Delphi panel compiles at the end of a round and sends it back. So so that's the one thing. You do not get that groupthink development, because as a Delphi panelist, I do not know who are the other people. I do not hear what they have to say. I just see their inputs in the document or in the text, appearing in the text. So in that way, it's more independent. So I remain being an individual, whereas in the focus group, I gradually become a group member. I don't know, does that make more sense if I explain it that way?
It does. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Robin, Mpumelelo, I see your hand is up. You're welcome to ask your question. You're welcome to comment.
Oh, yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Prof. Just a quick one. Do you mind explaining who qualifies as an expert in a Delphi technique?
Okay, so who qualifies as an expert? The expert is obviously someone that knows the topic very well. So in the example that I cited on the foster parents, we had to get people that, one, work with foster parents every day. Two, they must have like 5 years experience in doing that. Three, preferably they should have a postgraduate qualification. So it's really criteria that you set up to make sure you attract these experts. Some of the examples that I saw, they would also use like just ordinary community members, So it depends on how do you define the term expert. So I've just mentioned two types. So one type of expert is really someone with specialist knowledge, and for some applications that is warranted. But let's say you use the Delphi technique in designing a community intervention strategy. So who would be your experts? Your experts would be the people who live in that community, who have a thorough understanding of what life is about and have a contribution to make. So that's a different kind of experts, not necessarily well-known experts, but they are well-known in the community, and therefore they are considered an expert. So there's not a standard one-size-fits-all definition of an expert. It depends a lot on what you want to achieve and who you think would be able to give you the best kind of input into your problem. So I hope that makes it clear.
It does. Thank you very much, Prof.
Okay. Right, so the philosophical part is of the Delphi. It's actually what we have been talking about now. The Delphi panel does promote communication between groups, but as I've already said, it's a filtered or an indirect communication. It's not like a focus group where you actually steer or manage the group dynamics to your advantage. So it's like more jerky. It's more we get their input, then we wait for the input to come in. We consider the input as the facilitators on the other side. We incorporated their ideas into a document and then we send it back to them. And that's what is meant by asynchronous. It's an asynchronous approach. meaning that it's not interactive directly in the group setting, but it's basically individual participation versus group participation in the focus group concept. It's just that the social dynamics are slightly different, and you get a different kind of quality. You preserve that originality from the individual. Then the other thing that is valuable is the whole principle of anonymity, where your group members are anonymous, nobody else knows them. It's only the facilitators who know who they are, but they don't know the other group members. And therefore, it may be an advantage to use an independent facilitator. That's something I thought could be worthwhile, to ensure that that there's no bias. If you are the researcher and you plan a Delphi panel and you execute it, you have a kind of a conflict, a role conflict, because now you are the researcher and you are the facilitator. So that it may be good to recruit someone who could be independent and does not have an interest in the study per se, to ask that person to do it. Okay, so that's kind of the philosophy behind it, is to ensure anonymity and objectivity. Okay, so your considerations for choosing the Delphi as a design in research. So whenever you want to use Delphi, you have to think. Okay, there is a sequence, and I'll present that sequence later on to you. Where do you start? But in essence, you need to have a problem that needs to be resolved, which is, let's call it your research problem, if this is a research project. Think of it that it is necessary, whether you follow a qualitative or quantitative approach, it's necessary to formulate a questionnaire. You also need to consider distribution of a document, because this thing is it will be in the form of a document, what you are going to formulate. And then you need to identify a suitable method for providing feedback. So back in the olden days, before internet, this was like mailed. This document was mailed to you. So nowadays it's definitely much easier with email. So you just have like an email list, and you distribute it to the different people. But then again, you need but then you need to be careful that the panelists cannot identify. So it's not going to be very good to have like a group email and send it to the whole group, because in the recipients can see, this is the email of the other panelists. So you must preserve that individuality by not sharing the names of the different panelists to the group. So normally when you start with the first round, so that it's like round 1, round 2, round 3, you start by sending out, that's frequently the case. It's not the golden rule, but frequently they start by sending out this questionnaire. The questionnaire should be open-ended, preferably, and it should be like qualitative. So you send it out to them and you ask them to complete it. Let's say it's a scenario that they have to develop. So you can ask them, so in your opinion, what is the scenario if the petrol price increases to 30 Rand? What do you see as the scenario? And you await them to return that documentation. Of course, when you recruit your panelists, you have to explain to them what will be the expectation. That is going to be a written response. Okay, it's not going to be a verbal response like in a focus group. It's going to be written. Right. So after the questionnaire comes back, you analyze that data, and once again, in a research project, it may be necessary to indicate how you are going to analyze that data, probably using qualitative methodology. Then you put that into your document, all right, and you distribute that document for a second round. And you ask them, you can design it like in a Word document with spaces where they can make comments. Or else you can instruct them to edit, to send an edited version containing their ideas to you. And then you put it together into a combined or joint document. And then you send it out for a third time. Alternatively, you can also distribute another questionnaire, which could be open-ended, in the second round. And you continue doing that until you have gained until you've gained all the inputs, and there is like a saturation point. You're not getting new ideas. And qualitatively, that would be considered the point at which there is consensus, when there's no longer disagreement. Another option would be, and I'm actually still at that first point of the slide, is that you could set up opposing positions. Let's say in the scenario, you actually see, a few of these people, they talk in one direction, and another few of them, they talk in a different direction. So you can actually now in your questionnaire put those two opposing perspectives together and distribute that and ask them to say whether they agree with that or not. So that's where I think the qualitative can be supplemented by quantitative, especially if you have these two opposing positions and you have that in a document, and you ask, let's say that you have the document has like 5 or 6 points, and you ask them to indicate quantitatively whether they agree with this one or that one, or you ask them to rank order the statements from most important to least important. So that is another way. So now you bring in quantitative to obtain that agreement. And that's actually traditionally, like a binary. It's maybe now getting into the technical, but a binary kind of question where they have to say, I agree or I disagree. We can almost say that bringing in quantitative is like a voting process. So your participants kind of vote for the options that they like or dislike or don't want to see. All right. And from the results, quantitatively, you then just start eliminating the statements that have that draw low consensus or have the least support. So it's actually you don't need complex statistics to do that. You can simply do it by means of frequency distributions. All right. So validation of content is very much part of the whole Delphi process. Now just look at that idea about quantitative versus qualitative. The qualitative part, in a sense, is used. If you use a qualitative approach, it is used to stimulate additional content, to build content, to generate new ideas. All right, so that's what you would use the qualitative part, versus the quantitative would be, okay, we've now developed it qualitatively, we've got a nice big fat document with all your ideas into it. So now let's start reducing that to the bare essentials, and then you follow the quantitative approach where you ask them to rate all the items on the list, and then say, okay, we don't like this, we want that, and you can use whatever scaling format you want to. to achieve that. And sometimes you find that the quantitative ratings, are overruled by the qualitative recommendations. So you cannot actually say, I'm just going to follow qualitative methodology. You actually have to mix the two to optimize the feedback from the panel. Some of the examples, and actually the theory also talks about it, that it may be to your advantage to have a couple of live or online meetings from time to time to give feedback to the panelists and explain further expectations, as to what will happen in the next rounds. A live meeting, though, could open the opportunity for recognizing the other panelists, and that could be counterproductive. You could, instead of a live panel, you could also give them a summary report with feedback as to what is the status of the document right now and what will be the expectation for the following. So even though as researchers, if I can just take it back to, let's say you want to do this in a research project, the outcome is somewhat unpredictable. The process is somewhat unpredictable, and researchers don't like that. Ethics committees don't like that. They want to see, a rigid procedure that you're going to apply. They want to see your instruments and know, how you are going to follow this. But somewhere in this Delphi panel, you can't be that rigid, because you have to adjust your questions as you proceed. The same issue is with doing or using participatory action research, where you work with communities, and it's an iterative process. That doesn't go down very well with ethics committees, unfortunately. So you have to inform them, look, there will be uncertainties in how this process unfolds, and I cannot halt the process to now first submit my next questionnaire to ethics for approval, So you must just have a solid agreement regarding that. Right, so are there questions now, or is everybody happy?
Robin, there is a question in the chat. Let me get there quickly. It is from Glennis.
Right, I can't see it. Can you just read it out?
Yeah. Does the researcher filter the opinions of the participants and decide what will be incorporated into the document to be circulated for the next round? I think it speaks to the discretion of the researcher in terms of, do you include all the information you receive during the first round, or do you filter it?
Yeah, that is also dealt with differently in various examples. In some projects, they do filter it. So if they see that it is way off the mark, or it is not really going to enrich the document, then they cancel that out. The other option is that they will, instead of filtering, because filtering is the researcher's intervention, it's your decision, you make the call. And sometimes as researchers, you don't want to step in and make that call. You rather want to throw it back at the team. So what you do then is you take that material that you think is contentious or not contributing, and you, in the next round, you put that out and you ask them specifically to indicate whether they want that or they don't want that, whether they think it's useful or they think it's not useful. And then you use the level of agreement to decide on that. So it's kind of very democratic. It's not unilateral.
Thank you, Prof. Another question from Mpumelelo is, how big can the size of the panel be to give me quantitative data?
Yeah. Okay, that's a question often asked. There's also differences about that. There's actually not a size limitation to your panel. There are a few considerations to keep in mind. The one is, if your panel is too big, the inputs become just bigger and bigger, and it may be very difficult to manage such a large group. But then again, if your panel is too small, it does not necessarily it's not representative of the range of ideas that can be out there. So like a golden medium is between like 15 or 20 members, but it also depends on your on what the scope of your project is. If for example, I want to cite an example where we, as a part of a group, we had to develop, the group's task was to develop or do an analysis of an organization. This was during MBA studies. So we had to analyze a company and then come up with solutions for their problems. So it was all about generating solutions. And we drew up a report, and as a group, we were 7 members in a group. We decided to use the Delphi panel in order to check whether we were all happy or in agreement regarding what was said in the different parts of that document. So that was and it was amazing to see, even though everybody looked happy with the report, when you ask them individually, you actually get a different picture, and we could clearly see which areas of the report there was no consensus about. So that is an instance of a small group, but it was small because the project warranted a small group, But now take another example where you want to refine a policy. Let's say we set out to refine the white paper for social welfare, the 1997 one, that one, that old one that we used. Let's say we want to renew that. Then it is in our interest as researchers or project owners to make sure that the panel we use is large enough, and it needs to be like representative. So that kind of project mandates a different approach and a different size of panel. So you must be led by what will be feasible. If I think of a third example, let's say I want to get an estimate of what is the future, the political future in the country like. I could pose that question to like all the political commentators that I know, and right now I can think of 6 or 7 or 8 people that I can pull into this thing. So it depends, and I wouldn't then have more people because there aren't that many people that that can do that kind of analysis for me. So it depends very much on what you have in mind. What is the problem that you want to address? Okay, any more questions?
No other questions. Thank you, Prof. We can continue if you're ready.
Right, so in this slide I actually say exactly what I've just told you, is larger samples of panelists are better, but it's not that critical. So I've also alluded to that point, that you have to have specific inclusion criteria that's linked to the expertise of the person. So your panel members must be oriented towards your document, your project, and the manner in which you are going to run the project. So there must be a thorough training or orientation given to your panelists once you have them. They must be trained in order to understand what is expected. The worst thing would be if you were to lose members halfway through the process because they did not sign up for this extensive work that you are requesting from them. So they must be well prepared and willing to commit to maybe sometimes a rather lengthy process. But then you must also not be unrealistic and expect them to go through like 6 or 7 rounds of document refinements, especially if it's a 50 or 60 page document, you know. So usually there are like 3 or 4 rounds at the max of circulation to get consensus. So yeah, that is what I want to say about. And your participants don't necessarily have to be in your own country or in your own setting. They can be from other places in the world, you know, depending on your topic, what it is that you want to do. So there's no real limitation as to how you want to construct it. It's purposive, so the people are drawn close together because they have the same or a common knowledge base. Right, so if there are not, I don't know how are we doing for time. I think we are almost close to the point where we can have a short break, is it? I see we are busy 50 minutes now.
Yeah, it's 7 minutes before 10 o'clock, Robin. Would you like to continue or take the break now?
I think we can take the break now, and if there are any comments, maybe if there's somebody in the audience who has done or has conducted the Delphi panel, maybe they can just share from their experience, and then we have a short break.
Proven, a question came in from Google too, and it's, please, Prof, elaborate on the training of the panelists. What are they trained for? And I think maybe Google, I would like to add, you know, what would be the format of that? Would it maybe perhaps be on an individual basis or in a document, maybe a short video? Any ideas, Prof?
Yes. I would at this point not train them in a group setting to preserve their individuality at this point. So any means of training, this could be like one-on-one training via Teams or Zoom. It's one way. Or making available a document and asking them to study it, and then if they have questions. So what should be in that document? So you have to tell them about the duration of the study. What is the expectations of them? How long must they be involved in it? How many rounds will there be? Then the more direct expectation as to what will happen in your participation. So I'm going to send you a questionnaire that you have to complete. That's where we will start and get ideas. Then we will take those ideas and put them in a document, and then we will start redistributing that document and sometimes add another scale to get your opinion on some of the items. So simply giving out a document where you explain exactly the expectations. I think we all know, you know, that informed consent form that you send out along with as part of your recruitment. In there you explain exactly how this process will unfold. I would also train them in the fact that they are individuals and that their individual opinions count. Indirect group participation. So when I say indirect, in the end, of course, all the individual opinions come into a common document, but that it is all about their individual ideas that counts. So the training doesn't have to be very long, but your participants just need to know what is expected, and then they will be happy. I'm sure they will. You know, everybody is busy always, and experts seem to be even more busy than others. Yet, you know, you have to say to them, okay, it will take about 1 hour of your day, and overall we will use about 5 hours or maybe 7 hours of your time in order to complete the process. So that's what training would be. I just want to emphasize once again that on your side, if you're making use of an independent facilitator for the Delphi panel, you must make sure that you and that person are on the same page, and that he or she understands what is expected of her as a facilitator. When I say facilitation, that person takes control of the admin, all the rounds, sending out the questionnaire, but you can help. You are basically a team, and you are working together to sift and sort the data and exclude what is irrelevant, and interpreting the data and so on. So you are working together. It's just it will just make it easier than when you do all the work alone, and as I said, you may be biased. So that's what I would say about the training. It's not really that complex. Doesn't have to be. Okay.
Well, Wim, I think that wraps it up. No further questions in the chat, so perhaps it's time to take our break. How long break can we take, Wim?
Well, if we can be back in like 10 or 15 minutes.
Okay.
Would that be okay?
Is it fine if we make it 10 past 10? 10. It gives us about 12 minutes, roughly.
Okay. That's super. Thank you.
Colleagues, meet you back in about 12 minutes. Enjoy your break.
Your supervisor would make it, more accountable in that sense. Okay, so I'm going to share my presentation. I'm going to try that just now, is to do a bit more of a demonstration with, in practice on the technical aspects of it. So what we have done so far in the presentation is to look at the theory and the whole philosophy, how to structure it, how to train and recruit your participants for your study, for your Delphi panel. So now we can get to the technical aspects, and I think the second part of the session, the key question for me is, okay, so consensus sounds very nice, but how do you obtain consensus? And I have already indicated that qualitatively consensus can be achieved when you reach a point where you actually see there's no new information or inputs being made into your document. But I don't know whether you have been part of panels where you had to refine documents. Sometimes you read, for the so manyth time, you read through that document and you actually realize, you know what, I've made my inputs here, but I see there are ideas that are not necessarily my ideas. And but I'm going to leave it that way because I don't want to distract or don't want to make other people feel bad or, think that I disagree on this and this and that. So that is what sometimes happens if the approach is only qualitatively. Then that is kind of likely to happen, and so I think that emphasizes the fact that you should actually use a quant and a qualitative approach to finding that agreement. Ansi, I just want to make sure. Am I still on the air?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Right. So technically, what the process should involve is you should start with setting the indicators. So what are the points, the key points that you want opinions about? So these indicator points can come from your document. It can come from the themes in your first round qualitative questionnaire. It could be, a theoretical analysis of the problem that you want refined. But setting the indicators would be considered your first priority. So if I can give an example here of going back to that one where we wrote a report on the company, and we wanted to get consensus on the different points. So the different aspects of the report, the different sections of the report, we designed like 5 or 6 questions that would adequately indicate part of that section of the report, and those became the points that people had to evaluate. But let's make it simple. Most of you are probably at times in an academic environment, so let's consider a very practical example of tests written by students and test results. So you have like an internal examiner or an assessor, and you have another assessor who does it, looks at all the assignments or at the tests independently. So if you have like a range of 40 students, you have a number of 40 students in your class, and you have their marks, and you are the first examiner, and this is your mark, and now you have an independent second examiner, and that's her marks. Then the indicators are the marks per student for each rater. All right, so that is your first key task, is to identify what will be the dimensions or the indicators of evaluation of getting consensus on the key points. And this can be narrowed down in subsequent versions of the document, okay? So let's say the sections of the document, or the key points of the document, the key goals or objectives that you want to achieve, those could be your points for evaluating the document. We can still dwell on that because this can be rather vague, and I expect people will have questions about that. Right, so providing summary reports or findings to return feedback to experts and inform them of the outcome is necessary. So that's technically a key point in the process, is making that summary report available. Then you need to set your Likert scale. So it could be like a 7-point agreement scale, where 1 is, this is now for quantitative, where 1 is strongly disagree maybe, and 7 is strongly agree, and you have then your points in between. It could be much simpler. You could actually just have a 2-point scale, a agree and a disagree. It depends all on your audience and your own style and preferences. Then setting the cut-off points is the following important technical aspect. Now here there is just so many different ways in how that can be done. So in some examples I have found the researchers decided that if more than 60% of the panelists answered the questionnaire with a 6 out of 7, in other words, strongly agree, that would mean that that indicator is acceptable. But there are many other ways, and I will explain some of these as we go along. let's just go through the statistics. Key point is that it is not always necessary to use statistics for agreement calculation. There are easier methods. So in the previous slide, what I said here, setting the cutoff points, by saying if like 70% of the panel scored or a 6 or above, that means that indicator is acceptable. So it's some criterion that you as a researcher state that indicates the point of acceptability. You could also develop an importance index or a feasibility index. So hopefully it will work just now when I show this to you, how this can be done in different examples. But if you want to use statistics to determine the level of agreement, the more complex methodology is related to what's called inter-rater reliability, which is defined as the degree of agreement amongst raters. It also can be described as a sense of homogeneity or consensus there is in the ratings of the different raters. Then a statistic that is commonly used for this purpose is called Cohen's kappa. So Cohen's kappa is basically a statistical technique, and you find it in most of the software for statistical data analysis. There's then also Fleisch's kappa. The Fleisch's kappa is just used for different situations. All right, and then intra-class correlation coefficient, and then with kappa. Okay, so these are the three statistical options. So just to say give a little bit of background on statistics. The term different strokes for different folks, it holds regarding statistics. So it's just a book of rules. So if you have this situation, you use this test. If you have that situation, you use that test. Okay. So Cohen's kappa is used when you have two raters and you make use of categorical variables. For example, you have a category agree or disagree. Right. But now what if you have two or more raters? Let's say you have 3 or 4 raters. Then you use Fleisch's kappa again. All right, but the data is still categorical. So what if you have 2 or more raters and your variables are continuous? So then you use intra-class correlation coefficient. So okay, I'm now going to just go out of my PowerPoint here, and I want to go to a more practical example here. So just a moment, I'm just going to stop sharing, and I'm going to call up a common spreadsheet, and in that I will do a little example. So for now I'm just going to make a new spreadsheet, okay, and I'm going to enlarge it, right, so that everybody can clearly see that. Okay, so let us just look at the one option. So we have let's say the case here. So these are your let's say it's the number of students. So student 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And you've got their marks. Right. So rater 1 and rater 2. These are your two raters. Now you know that our panels do not necessarily consist of two raters. It might be more. All right, so that's where the problem comes in. So in the first scenario, this is where you would use Cohen's kappa. If we say that this is categorical, it means we only have like a number like that, you know. So this is the simple one where 0 is, let's say, disagree, and 1 equals agree. Okay, so so this would be the scenario, the easiest scenario, I'd say. So maybe the situation looks like that, you know, and we have a couple of 1s and a couple of 0s and so on. Okay, and for rater 2, we have a situation like this. He thought differently about it, all right, and his pattern looks a little bit different. So in order to get to understand whether there is agreement between these two people and their ratings, it's a simple matter of subtraction. You just do a little subtraction. So I call it the inter-rater agreement level. So all you do is you take the highest one and you subtract the lowest from it. So in this instance, if you 1 minus 0 remains a 1. This is a 0. This is 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, and a 0. Okay, so this is the simple subtraction. What you do is you count all the zeros and you find out of 10. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 out of 10, there was agreement. All right.
I'm
yes.
not sure if we see the same screen that you see.
Okay, let me just go
Want to
there.
make sure. We see the Excel sheets.
You don't necessarily see it working. Okay. Let me just go back to it. Just want to go into stop sharing, and then I'll just share again. Okay, this is what I want you to see. Can you see it? Okay. Okay, so just look at this again. This is now where you had a simple agree or disagree, a binary kind of a variable, and this is categorical. It's either disagree or agree. Okay, so an agreement index would be where both raters agreed on a point. All right. So here you have an instance of that. So if you subtract the two, you find that the answer is 0. Here the answer, there's no agreement. This one here, number 4, you know, that is an instance of agreement. Number 6 is an instance of agreement. Okay, so that's only counting these two raters' opinions. Okay, so it would be simple to say that 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 out of 10 agreed on whatever the point was. And therefore, we have a 60% agreement rate. So this is the easiest way in which we can compile an agreement index. Right, so you just have to count the number of instances or observations or points that you have rated, and you know, by subtracting you can actually see. But if you want to use now a statistical technique, you would use Cohen's kappa. Okay, so the kappa statistic will give you an estimate of a statistical estimate of the agreement. And usually what we find, the Cohen's kappa value is the same as what you have calculated here, more or less. Okay. Right, so that was like the first example. So the second example is, but what if you have more than one rater? So that's the instance where you have another rater, okay, number 3, and you have his or her scores in here. What do you do then? Right, so then this won't work so nicely. So there are different ways in which they do it. They first work out an index for rater 1 and 2, and then they do an index for rater 2 and 3, and then they do one for 1 and 3, and then compare and see whether the percentages match. But according to the rules that I've just given you, you would use Fleischer's kappa for that. All right, so that helps you to overcome that problem. Right, so now in the following situation, you have you do not have like only a binominal variable like this, but you have like you have one which is strongly disagree, and okay, strongly disagree. So okay, I'm not going to spend too much time on that. And then at the other extreme, and you have a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 5 and a 6, and then a number 7 equals strongly agree. Right, so this is more like an ordinal type of variable that has more than these two categories of a 0 and a 1. All right, so in that instance, you would now start looking at intra-class correlation. The other example is where, let's say you have marks for a test that you insert here. Now the variable becomes it becomes continuous. All right. So in that instance, so it's no longer a 0 and a 1. There are now definite marks to consider. And how do you determine the rate of agreement amongst those numbers? So in an instance like this, where your data looks like that, the variables are clearly continuous, and that's where the ICC, the so-called ICC formula come into play. And that's also where you would use the intra-class correlation. So another question that is often found in the whole statistics debate is, so what if you have rater 1 here, and now rater 1 does a rating the second time. Okay, so so time plays a role. So now you can also measure agreement over time. Right, so you can compare rater 1 to rater 2 in using exactly the same kinds of statistics, and in that instance it's called intra-rater. So I'll just get my terms right. Inter means between raters agreement, and intra means within the same rater but just over time. All right, so enough of these technicalities. I think you get the idea. So I now would like to just go to my second spreadsheet, and I want to show you how we did it in another study. So I think the idea that I want to create is it this one? No, I don't want this one. The idea that I want to create here is that if you have a basic background about how agreement works, you don't have to do this yourself. You can get someone else to do the analysis for you. In the example that hopefully I can show here, it's just going. Right, so let me start now. I'm showing you here an example that was done by one of my students. And this was an inter-rater agreement for a scale. This study is the BIOC scale, the best interest of the child scale. It's a huge project we are developing a scale in, and we needed to get the opinions of academics mainly regarding their agreement with the items in the scale. So we have a section A, all the questions in section A. Question 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So these were different items in the scale, and then we have all the ratings. So we have rater 1 here, 2, 3, etc., etc. We had more than 100 raters, and they used a 3-point scale in this instance, where 1 was, I definitely do not think this item should be included. 2, maybe it should be included. 3, it should be included. All right. So that was basically the data. This is how it looks. And then all we did is we calculated all the ones. We added them together for all the questions. You can see that here. That's the total. Maybe include, there were 17 opinions, 16, 26, and so on for all the items. Definitely include, that was the score ranges. So what we did is we decided that if a person said maybe include, we will add it to definitely include. We were going to throw them all into, okay, let's do it. Let's go for those items. And that was then the final score. All right, if we subtracted the ones that, the total would be 107, but 101 of them then actually said maybe and definitely. All right, so now immediately this gives you an indication. So we just calculated it as a percentage agreement. Right, so we said out of 107, 101, so that's about 94% of the participants said they agreed this item should be included. 91, and here it's down low to 83. And then we set a criterion to say, okay, if it is below 0.9, we need to reinvestigate that item and see what is it. Now, qualitatively, they could make comments about the items. So then we would go to this item number, whatever, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 of section A, and we would revise that item. And then in a second round, you would send it out again. We didn't do that. We only did one round. But you can then send it out again and ask for agreement again. So can you see how nice this is? I mean, you don't need complex stats for it. It's a little bit of math, and you can actually already see what's going on. I would even say there could be minor changes to these two items because they are quite low. All right, and we did that for all the questions in the questionnaire, and we got a very nice rendition of, or idea as to, like here we have everybody was in agreement that the item would hold. So this is a simple way for understanding the whole issue of agreement. Right. So are there questions about that so far? Are you happy? Does this make sense?
Yes, Prof. I have a question with regards to the qualitative data or the opinions that you would like to elicit from the experts. Do you ask them to make comments on the document, let's say via track changes, or do you use Google Docs? So in the end, on a practical note, if people receive, let's say the first draft of the protocol, you want to get feedback.
Yeah.
Do you send out the protocol in Word and ask them to add their comments via track changes? And I mean, because that would feed into a quantitative round later on. Once you have an idea what are the specific variables that you really want to evaluate or test with them. So if you can maybe speak to first qualitative round, thanks.
Yeah. In this instance, you already have a document on the table that you use as a startup. So you're going to send that out, and then you can use track changes or comments, the comments option very effectively, so that you get all the feedback from the different people, and then you put it together and build the document in that way. But I would not necessarily say that using Google Drive is the same. If you have like a shared file space, such as Google Drive or Cloud or whatever, you get a different kind of input. It's more live. There's no time delay. There's no time to stand back a little bit and assess what has happened. It's just ongoing, the changes that are being made. So I think it can work, but you must just understand that in the other process, although it is slower, where you first get all the results and then you process it, it's different to when the document is out there and everybody is consistently working on it. I agree that a high level of agreement and consensus is eventually reached if you use that option with Google Drive or a shared document. But personally, especially if it is for research purposes, for me it would be important to preserve that individuality of the individual person's input, unrestricted. So I would not do a shared drive type of idea, because I think it could contaminate the originality of the input. I actually haven't seen it being used in examples too. So it seems that in spite of all the computer possibilities, it is not necessarily that popular. I've read an article though on using computers, and in that they are kind of vaguely referring to the fact that you could do it that way. I think we need more research to test it out. I personally like the idea of getting the results, having time to browse over it, to incorporate the ideas, and then sending it out again.
And if we work with people who are not so technically savvy, your computer illiterate people, and we would go out and do this process in person, would you sit with a person? How would we get feedback, let's say from a community member? Any thoughts on that? Would they tell us, we record like you would do in a qualitative interview? I was just thinking about, tapping into all the knowledge that we have in the community, although you might not get them to use a computer to add the information, the comments.
Yeah. So it would be possible to do that within the scope of an interview. I think there are even instances where they use qualitative techniques like in-depth interview data and incorporate that into a document. But certainly, if that's the scenario, you would take the document and discuss it with that person and get feedback on it. It would be different to a normal in-depth interview, which is something else. It renders a different kind of information. But I would take out the document and say, look, from the panel, I can see these are like the issues in this community that warrant, according to the others. So what is your ideas on this? Would you like to add? Do you differ? That would be my stance. I'd gather that specific information, gather it from all the others, and then change the document, go back to that person. So it's a longer manual process, but and more interactive. But that's how I would advise you to do that.
Thank you. Prof. Carlene, you're welcome to continue with your question or comment.
No, thank you. I just have a comment as to, and I think I actually just want to confirm what Prof. Rustenberg just said. I've just completed a PhD student. It's actually still fresh, the research. Is graduating only next week. And I think definitely one of the examiners is also in this training session. I think maybe two of them. And we really had excellent feedback. So maybe just for in the future, I'm not going into, she did only qualitative work. So she developed a assessment protocol to differentiate between parental alienation, child alignment, and child preference in high conflict divorce. So she really had experts, like real experts. That was difficult to get hold of, real experts in the field, not only of social work, also in law. And she did an excellent, part of her refinement and the development was using Delphi method, but it was an extremely lengthy process. But I want to say, I think it's a good example. She really received excellent comments and from the examiner. So I think it's a good example. I can maybe give a name here because I mean she is graduating. So it's the study of Lizanne Lennox. So if somebody wants to contact me, I mean I've got the final document, but I think it's something, it was only qualitative with rich data, but it's a lengthy process. It's lengthy and intense, I think.
Do you, as a matter of interest, do you know how many rounds she went through?
Oh, I actually quickly opened the document here, and that was now a while ago. I mean, she completed it at the end of last year. I think it was at least 3, but it was really, she first had interviews with semi-structured interviews to define these concepts, and then she started to, she developed a conceptual framework first, so it was quite a process and to get the input from everybody. But I think it's a good example. It was my first time, so we've used somebody at Northwest University who used Delphi technique earlier as a co-supervisor or promoter, just for that input.
Okay.
That was helpful. So, but I've learned quite a few lessons, and I think there's more to learn. But, just to mention that.
Fantastic. No, thanks for that example, and it's great to hear that, and also the creativity that went into mixing in other methods and so on. It can be a little bit of a minefield, though. You must keep your head together to make sure that you have it lined up in the correct order. For example, the way she did it now with qualitative interviews at the start is a very good idea, because then you still want rich data. It's only later on that you want to narrow it down. So it might be less useful to have like qualitative in-depth interviews at the end, because she
used semi-structured interviews because she had to explore those specific meaning for the participants of these different concepts.
Right.
But it was intense. It really was intense, and I don't think all students will be able to do it. She struggled. There was a question earlier on literature. She really struggled. I quickly went through the literature. She really took from everywhere. But I think there was a good representation of literature. But it's not that there's one source that you can say this is the source to use, or a handbook or something, a textbook.
Yes.
Just to mention that.
Okay. Thanks, Carlene. Right. So we've talked about the different statistics now. So I just want to, I will give you an example of Cohen's kappa, what it looks like, a picture just now. But there is, like in anything in statistics, there is an interpretation guide. So if you ever get confronted with Cohen's kappa, just look for a figure between 0 and 1, all right? And then you interpret it like this. So it will be, if it is like this, like 0.79, it's moderate. If it's 0.9, it's strong. Above 0.9, it's almost perfect. And you also want to see a significance indicator, which is basically saying if it is significant, less than 0.05, it actually means that the strength of agreement, the level of agreement is not 0. Okay, That's all that it says. So don't scrick if you see those statistics. It's actually very simple to interpret. So briefly then, like I said, there are different models. They call them ICC models. That's when you have continuous variables like scaled variables in your inter-rater agreement index. So just take note of different models. That comes in handy when you want to do the analysis. For example, in SPSS, they just distinguish between random and non-random methods. Where you have randomly selected raters, it's a different scenario. It's a different situation at all. It's not very common to find Delphi panels with randomly selected raters. As you will know, I've emphasized the whole idea of purposive selection. And then so model 3 is probably what we will be using normally. So if that makes any sense to you, stick to model 3. Right, this one, don't worry too much about it. It's just a further distinction between these different models, just outlining different situations, but not to worry too much about it. Right, so I'm going to show you now an example of how we used intra-class correlation and kappa in this instance. This is from the report that I told you about. So we relied a lot also on mean scores to see on average what did the 7 raters say, you know. So what you would see here is this is like the financial part of the company, and these are the 4 questions that we asked, the 4 indicators. All right, so this could just as well be 4 raters and 5 and 10 students, you know, it doesn't matter. But in this instance, it was a document, so we had questions about the aspects of the document that were evaluated. Right, and then we have, I don't know if you can see it very clearly, we've got the kappa down here. So the kappa value is 0.81, 0.308, 0.105, 0.208, 4, 3, and 372. So overall, you can see that the significance indicator holds here. So this instance and this one down here were the only 2 areas in which there was a high level of agreement. So in none of the other cases there was like significance. So and this is typically what you would see at the beginning of a quantitative process. Going on further, you know, now you can qualitatively refine the document and make changes to it and so forth, and then you do this again. You do another quantitative rating of that report, and hopefully you will get more, you know, more of these dimensions or parts of the report that draw consensus. So there was consensus on the financial. Nobody contested that. Nobody contested strategy management in the organization. This is kind of a boundary case, but it's actually too weak. But on all these dimensions at the moment, there's not really much of an agreement. Right, so here is an example now of the kappa statistic for more than one category. This is now for the continuous category. Right, so SPSS gives you a table output like this, and you just interpret this, this bottom line here, and you can see it's significant, and you can see that this is the intra-class correlation, or the kappa value. So this is 0.432. So it's rather weak in terms of that interpretation guideline. It can go through, but it's a small kind of effect here if we can actually talk about effect. So this is the only table you have to really interpret. There are other fancy things you can do, but that's not necessary. You are just interested in this table here. So in this instance, we saw that the significance is it is significant, and there's like a small intra-class correlation indicating that there is a moderate level of agreement amongst the different raters. Okay, so my guideline would be use a frequency table first and choose the highest score obtained according to the preset standard, as I've illustrated before. Alternatively, if you have like a 7-point scale, you can combine or recode the data, as it's called, and then you can reduce it to 2 scores, as I've indicated, a 0 or a 1, and that this is the formula you use to calculate your index, your agreement level. Colleagues, and this is basically what I wanted to share with you regarding the kappa. What I want to do now, let's first hear if there are questions. I want to show you some more examples maybe, but let's first hear what you have to say.
Proven, there's a question from Dr. Billa, and can you please repeat the information on using an independent facilitator?
Can I please repeat that part on the independent facilitator?
Dr. Billa, would you like to maybe unmute yourself and elaborate more on what it is you specifically need to know about this topic? Is it possible?
Thank you so much. I wanted, just because I missed it, it was asked in the chats. I didn't get the question being answered. I didn't hear it.
About the independent person facilitator. Yeah. Okay. What I said about the independent facilitator is it may be useful to utilize someone who is knowledgeable. So this could be an expert, him or herself, as the facilitator of the panel. Ideally, this should also be someone who has a little bit of background and experience of the Delphi panel utilization, so that this person can do the facilitation, meaning sending out the documents to the different panelists and getting it back, in analyzing the data, incorporating the data in a new document. So it's more or less like a team. So this could be, it's not only the independent person's work, but this could be part of what he does together with the researcher. The actual facilitation, so dealing with the participants, it could help if that's done by the independent person, the independent facilitator. To my mind, it would just add to the objectivity. So the researcher is then kind of an outside person who looks at the data objectively and at the output more objectively than the facilitator. So that's what I basically had to say about that. I don't know if that makes sense. It also gives that idea of a team.
Thank you so much.
Robin, there's another question from Armin. Which number of points rating scale would be ideal for this kind of work? I like the idea of using a simple 3-point rating scale.
Yeah. Personally, I also like the idea of a 3-point rating scale. But I'd like to say, if you can force your participants into one of 2 categories, that is ideal. So even if you use like a 2-point scale or a 4-point scale with no middle neutral kind of option, you actually force the participants into 2 categories. Why 4 and not 2? I think it's sometimes very difficult to say whether you really agree or just disagree. It's more a gradual thing. So you are more likely to say, well, I agree somewhat. So you could even use a 5-pointer or a 6 or 7-point scale. Actually, the more categories you have, the finer your tuning becomes. So you can even vary that. You can have in the beginning a robust agree, disagree, or if it is a contentious set of points, you can do it like that, and then you get a very robust, rough categorization, and later on in follow-up quantitative questionnaires you can actually